total number of unicorns in India by in next 5 years?
Okay. So I would say that, currently I think India is close to 50 and US is probably close to, 400 unicorns. So India should probably reach cross the level of what US is today. So, more than 400, by 2025.
Okay. Abhishek?
Yeah, I think in a similar range. I think somewhere between 3 to 500 would be my guess.
Hello and welcome everyone. I am Raj Singhal and this is a brand new series called Founder Series. Here at Founder Series, we will be calling founders, CEOs and builders who have created world-class businesses and deep dive into them. Our aim is to dissect how great businesses are built and how investors look into them. This is part of our mission to share quality knowledge on investing. We are kicking off today's episode with Neha Singh and Abhishek Goyal, co-founders of Tracxn. Tracxn is one of the largest private market intelligence platforms, tracking startups and emerging technology sectors globally like IoT, blockchain, AI, robotics, fintech, cybersecurity, and more. Used by venture capital funds, private equity funds, and Fortune 500 corporates across 50 countries. Prior to Tracxn, Neha was a venture capitalist at Sequoia Capital. Before Sequoia, Neha was a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group. Engineer by background, Neha did her BTech and MBA in computer science and engineering from IIT Bombay, where she graduated with Institute's Silver Medal. She also got the Google Women in Engineering Award, recognizing women student achievers in the field of computer science. Neha did her MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. She has been awarded Fortune 40 Under 40 by Fortune India magazine and Outstanding Women Award by Outlook Business. Abhishek is a graduate from IIT Kanpur, worked with Yahoo and Amazon before joining Excel and then starting Tracxn. He has been recognized as part of the 40 Under 40 list by Fortune India in 2018 and 2019. In various avatars, Excel, Tracxn Lab, and personally, he has invested in 150 plus startups over the last 13 years, which include names like Flipkart, Delivery, Rupeek, Gamescraft, Airmeet, and Labs. So, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Neha and Abhishek. Hey, Neha and Abhishek, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you again, Abhishek. This is our first episode of a new series called the Founder Series, and also this is the first time that actually we've got two co-founders together on the show. So it's going to be a special show. So I guess let's have fun. Yeah.
Look forward to, excited about that.
Yeah, thanks, Neha. So Neha, let's start with your story first because I found it quite interesting. And so you did your graduation in computer science from IIT Bombay, and you won multiple medals, including the Institute Silver Medal, and that speaks a lot about your interest in technology. So how did you grow your interest in business, or should I say that are you a techie first and a businesswoman later, or you're a businesswoman first?
Yeah, I think it would be more like a techie first and then business, but it was always, so I'll give you a little bit of background. So for instance, I grew up in a very, sort of academic tech oriented family. So my dad is from IIT Kanpur, my brother is from the same college, IIT Bombay. I grew up in a colony, in an area called BARC colony, Bhabha Atomic Research Center, in which half the people in the colony are scientists. So, it was a very sort of a tech and academic oriented, a family and environment. And, I knew that obviously I need to, engineering was like the first love, and the computer science was probably the first love, initially from school itself. So I think that was very close to at heart. But over time, I think the thing that excited me most is about, using technology to more have impact on the lives. And to give you a very small example, it looks very rudimentary right now, difficult to imagine, but in 2001 2, when I think we were just in the later college and starting to go to college, that time cell phones had come in, And that was like, now it looks like a decade back. It looks very obvious to have that, but that was the first time wherein you saw, it had a lot of impact, like impact in your life. So I think the love was always about, using technology to solve or, to impact life and, have it more actionable. So that is why when I was graduating, I had actually two options. One is to go as a software engineer, and the other one was, to go to as a management consultant. And I realized that, I don't want to be like coding my whole life. I want to be in the technology space, was more on the business side. So that is why I chose, sort of management consulting, which gives you sort of good exposure across industries. And this was also on the back of my head that, I want back to something which is more tech. So, after 2 years, when you got the opportunity, you again came back to like a VC, which is sort of more business in investing in tech. So that's, to summarize, that has always been, using tech, but more on the business side of it.
Okay, that's quite interesting, Neha. Abhishek, let's come to you. You won multiple hats in your career, starting off as a software developer, then working as a VC with Excel Partners, and finally an entrepreneur with Traction. Tell us more about your interesting journey so far.
So I actually grew up in a very conventional Marwadi family. Grew up in Jodhpur and around South Rajasthan, and very academically oriented in early days. I was top 100 ranker in JEE in my batch. Went to IIT Kanpur Computer Science. In post college, started a tech career. That was the time everybody like post engineering was becoming a developer, and I was in computer science. So anyways, that was the primary stream. So I worked with Yahoo in their tech team and Amazon. I think this was the time. I think Yahoo was at its peak. It was the largest internet company globally at that time, and it was also a crash course of internet. So Yahoo had like 2 businesses, and every week somebody would do a business capsule, and you would learn how auto works in US or how listings would work in US. And so it was a very good learning experience. And then Amazon was 2006. That's when Amazon launched AWS. And I think it was a very interesting moment because everybody in the world thought Jeff Bezos has lost it during that period. And how some of the largest ideas in the world can get misunderstood in the early days. That was very interesting to see firsthand. And then I joined Excel right after a programming job. So it was a very serendipitous moment. They were located close to me, and they were looking at investing in internet world. And they thought one of my friends was funded by them, and they thought I could bring some of my knowledge base there, and I joined them. And this was the time when we funded Flipkart. That was one of the also an interesting point for me to see like some of the smaller, like very small company getting built into a very large mammoth. And in 2010, I decided to be an entrepreneur again. And I think I started Urban Touch, which was an e-commerce company. And then in 2013, me and Neha started Traction. I think we were both investors, and we thought we used very little technology to do our jobs, whereas we were both programmers by background. And we thought a lot of it could be solved through tech. And over time, we started exchanging notes, and it grew into something which we thought could be built into a very large company. And here we are today.
Okay. So when you guys started Traction, were you both married at that time, or you got married after?
No, at that time I was in actually college, Stanford.
Okay.
So this happened after that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it was planned beforehand, and we actually initially tried to convince each other about not doing that. I think that was probably the thing, because I think it is just I think it's just putting too many eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
So we tried to convince each other that, let me do it. Why don't you do something else? And then eventually we both wanted to do it independently. So we thought we might as well just do it.
Okay.
Actually, interestingly, we had both sort of written something in our, when we were working as investors in our, when we were investing in the private market. So that was like an initial point of sort of, we used to compare notes, and that's how initially, the Traction basically got founded.
Okay. So let's get. Sorry, Abhishek, go on.
It's a rare case where we both thought of this idea independently in different forms, and we wanted to pursue it individually.
Yeah.
That's actually very interesting. So let's come to let's talk about Traction as a business. I've read many places Traction is actually called as a Bloomberg for private markets. So let's understand. What is this Traction about? Whole thing. Let's talk about the whole journey of Traction.
Yeah, sure. So, as Abhishek was just mentioning, that as private market, one of our as private market investors, there was so much of information asymmetry. Like when you are a public market investor, you are not struggling to find out what are the listed companies or what are the companies that you can invest in and information about them. You're probably doing the next level of analysis, which is which thing that you want to invest in, what are the parameters you want to invest it on. However, if you look at the private market, there's so much of information asymmetry in just finding out information about who exists. And here, investors are spending disproportionate time in finding out companies. And on the other side, actually, founders are spending disproportionate time looking for the right investors who can invest in the stage and the sector. So that exists. And also, for instance, if you're looking at as investors, you are always looking at one particular model, and then you want to compare who else exists globally within that. Right? Either because the company is competing globally, or you want to see how that model has evolved in different regions. Right? So there's a lot of so actually just to figure out, for instance, when you were this was way back, probably like a decade back when e-commerce was just becoming large. Just to find out what verticals have become large in other countries. In US and China, this was non-trivial. So you actually had to visit there, speak to people, and then get that information. So the basic thesis is that in private market is becoming. It wasn't significant probably 2 decades back. Right now it is becoming large, and there's a lot of information asymmetry that exists. Right? So that is one thing, and the other thing is that there's more and more information about companies that is going to that is come online. The digital footprint about companies is increasing because the way you educate customers about your product, the way you acquire product, a lot of it is happening online, right? So there'll be more and more information about companies that is coming online. So with that thesis, we essentially, started at, can we use technology to find out information about private companies that exist globally, right? And that's how Traction was founded. So essentially, Traction is essentially like a platform which provides private market intelligence for anyone who's looking at private companies, startups, or emerging technology sectors globally. We work with essentially private market investors and large corporates, right, who are looking at this market either for investment or for acquisition or for finding out interesting products coming up across different sectors. And today we have like customers in over 50 countries.
Okay, that's awesome. So private market, by logic itself, will consist of millions of companies, right? And public market information easier because there are rules, regulations around that they need to publish those information. You'll have the regulators will ask, and the corporate law will ask them to publish the data, the annual reports. But it's very difficult for the private market to do that. How do you get about collecting the information of that scale?
Right. So exactly. So I think you said it right that in the private market, the addressable set is of a few million companies essentially that you end up covering, and that you want to look at any point in time. The way we solve it is using technology. So obviously we have a lot of technology that mines information about companies, digital footprint, and then the other thing is that you also make it very actionable and enterprise grade, because essentially you're working with high paid professionals. So you make it very actionable. So if someone wants to look at like AI companies or drone companies in India or fintech companies in a particular niche who are giving say loans to businesses only, right? So anything that you want to look at, essentially it is a very sort of organized information. So I think obviously we could not have done without. I mean tech is a major component of that which helps us get information, and then you also make it sort of very actionable for your end users.
Okay. And when you started, was it always you always started with a global vision, or you started with India first and then eventually spread over to the global companies?
So interestingly, we started with US first. Because
Okay.
all our initial customers also were all in that vicinity of like 10-mile radius of Stanford. They were all corporates and VCs, PEs, all in that vicinity, because that is the largest market. So we started with US, and India we launched after a year, because we used to get a lot of requests for data for here, and people used to anyways sort of take it. So we then launched it over there. So the idea was global from day one, US to begin with, and then probably then the other countries.
Okay.
And if Abhishek wants to add.
Actually, we got incubated in Lightspeed US, and then while we were we spent 3 months there, we sort of choked out a plan saying that these are the things we'll do and how do we, we had seen Bloomberg by then, so we knew how wide the product would eventually be. And then we were figuring out what is the right way to enter so that you can get a good price point as well as you build good competency and then you can scale it. And when we were building, we realized that actually this will require not only very good technology, but also it will require good curation. So that's when we actually moved back to India and started building it from here, and we continued to sell in US. So I came back, Neha was still in US. She spent years selling the product there initially herself. And, but I think we clearly knew that US is the large market and you have to capture that, and that's how it evolved.
Okay, that's awesome. So, I mean, taking a step back, did you guys have the same vision when you started out? How did this whole thing evolve? We all know that startups is tough. There are always ups and downs. I think even Yashish in his earlier episode was mentioning that probably I think the it's by I think 5th year is one when you realize that you have actually made it in terms of that you're going to be staying there and you have a sustainable business model and all. How did this all evolve? What were the highs and lows for you guys?
So I think in our case, we both had the fortune of seeing a lot of companies very closely. During my time at Accel, I worked closely with 5 to 10 companies. And in a lot of cases, because you are among the young member of the team, founders end up sharing a lot of their difficult times also. So we knew that even things that look very interesting or very successful from outside, inside there's a lot of struggle and there's a lot of hard work that goes behind it. And so in our case, a lot of that hardship was expected, and it didn't sort of, every time we had a tough time, we almost expected it instead of getting, instead of feeling low about it. And that really helped us a lot. Other than that, I think we had, in the first 1 year, we had a lot of discussion on what we will build as a company. So we had a lot of clarity on what we were building, and we were somewhat expecting what is happening. So the emotional swings are not as high as you would expect from first-time founders, and because of these two reasons. And other than that, I think we had reasonable success early on, right? So we were, before Series A, we actually were profitable for a few months. So we were able to manage a lot of our cost. And secondly, I think this problem was very close to us. So we kept talking about it for years. Would we ever start anything else? But we always came back and thought about and saying that this is the only business you would want to build if there is an option, right? And the market was still wide open. So there was an option to actually continue to build on your vision and build something which solves the problem and for the entire community. And it came like a sacrifice and a hard work rather than feeling low about it. And I don't know, Neha, if you have something to add to it.
No, actually, this is a problem that really excites, at least me. And, I'm sure that's true for both of us. That you really want to see this solved, and you want, and this is like a big problem, right? You've just started, and there's so many things more to do, and you're always discussing about to do this versus that. So I think this is something that you want to that you're really excited about also solving. So I guess that the operational highs and lows, yes, that happens, I guess. But I think that doesn't impact you a lot because you have, some vision of how, what you want to build or how you see this industry sort of evolve in the next few years.
So in this decade of journey so far, and you've been becoming a successful business, you want to share any numbers with us, or what level you've been growing, whatever numbers you can share. I mean, whatever possible from your side, and also. Just bit of I also want to understand the competitive analysis as well. There are a couple more, similar platform like TechCrunch, Crunchbase, and a couple more as well. How do you map out all of that? So first about your own growth in terms of how you've grown in those 10 years, and how do you fare along with all those competition?
Right. Sure. So just to take the first one, I think the way just to give some of the highlights. One, we have customers sort of globally. We have customers in more than 50 countries today. We work with also large Fortune 500 customers across different industries. We have right now, more than 600 people, interestingly, all based out of Bangalore. So we are serving even the sales and the support that happens across all the regions happens from Bangalore. So we have people who are working, across different time zones. They cover, all the time zones, but essentially, your entire sort of building as well as support that happens from here over Bangalore. So that's quick on the business. Coming to the competition, I would say, globally, actually, we have only about a handful of players in this space, which is much lesser than what you would expect, in some other industry wherein you have, 10 players in Bangalore doing the same thing. And yours, probably one person is across the road, in the same HSR layout, which is now the hub. So it is not as competitive as that market. In the whole, globally, we have only about just half a dozen, probably 5 to 6 players which are relevant in the private market, which is also a function because we are a vertical sort of SaaS, we are a vertical SaaS sort of player. So we are in an industry, versus like a horizontal, right? So we cater to an industry. So there are, there are these usual names that you have. I would say still a lot of them have taken different approach towards the private market data. And you can also see the way they have sort of begin. So Crunchbase, for instance, started with more as contributions of deals, right? And then they evolved into this product. The way for instance, PitchBook had started. The founder used to work at Venture Source, I think, earlier, and then he thought that you can actually apply this to PE, which will be relevant, and that's how it started. So it actually started from a very different angle. We started saying that the way VCs see it. For them, it is companies, it is sectors, that is very important. So the way we started actually is not all the companies, but we started sectors. So we started cybersecurity as a coverage area, IoT as a coverage area, and anyone who's looking at it doing that. So I would still say that there is a fair amount of differentiation in the kind of approach or the core sort of USPs that a lot of the platforms are currently catering to. So, I would say currently it is not, we don't see this market as a very highly competitive market. It is more that, you are selling to customers who are adopting technology for the first time. So all the customers, for instance, that we would have sold, like even the funds that we would have sold the platforms, actually they were not using anything like even 3 to 4 years back. So for them, it's more around educating that you can also use this and how you use this and how you basically, can benefit from this.
Okay. Yeah. That's quite interesting. So let's come to, how, because, you guys carry so much of insights and data around the private markets, and, it can have, actually, before that, I want to come back to the related question to the business itself. What part of your business is more driven by the funds, and what part of the business broadly driven by corporates? I mean, is this more skewed towards? Yeah. Is it more skewed towards
fund? Actually, currently, it is interestingly, it's nearly equal across, your private market investors and large corporates. The use cases are slightly different. So private market investors are looking at, VCs and PEs are looking at investment, when they investment or diligence or tracking markets closely. That's the main use case. The corporates, essentially in the corporates, we work with two broad use cases. One is your M&A teams, corp dev teams, so looking at more acquisition targets, investment opportunities across the sectors. Another one is basically product discovery is a big, use case. So for instance, all the innovation teams that you work with. Interestingly, when you're looking at, so think about a bank who wants to implement, say, digital KYC, across all their customer, they want to remove the physical step in the customer onboarding process, right? So they are looking at all eKYC solutions, in their region that exists. So that is a use case that we also cater to. So different corporates for the different use cases are looking at, technology people to partner with and companies to partner with. So I would say the use case is different, but there is equal sort of we have sort of equal spread across all.
Okay, that's interesting. So you guys carry so much of data and valuable insights. how do you see that driving the whole, next era of private market investing? Can you talk about that? Your broader impact on the private markets itself because of the data availability of the data.
Right. So one use case is that you want to you want to remove the information asymmetry as much as possible. You want to make it more efficient. What that means is that if, for instance, you want to source deals by say meeting people who are the most active people in this sector. You want to invest in NFT. You want to figure out who have invested in that, just to understand it and then do that. You should be able to do it. Right, simple things like that. Or if you are looking at companies in a particular sector, you should be able to. So there are funds, for instance, who invest in a particular sector like fintech globally, not just in one thing. So you should be able to see those companies globally, right? Or or you want to see sector is at which maturity curve, right? Is it early? Is it late, etc.? You should be able to see. So one thing is basically just making whatever information that people are asking for. Insights, etc., that becoming more and more available. So that continues to be sort of our drive. I would say we have solved it to some extent, but there's a lot more that needs to be solved based on what we hear from the customers and what they sort of come back to. So I think that is one key thing that we will continue to do. Apart from it, obviously, that you want to make it more easily accessible. You want to make it more easily usable. So if you want to do if you want to figure out on your portfolio what is a good time to exit, what is M&A more active, is IPO more active, etc., you should be able to do all those very easily. So just making it more sort of personalized is the other second angle. But I would say just in the data itself, there are so many more things that our customers keep asking on a daily basis that you keep adding those information, you keep adding those sort of analysis insights over time. So that's how I see it. If Abhishek has sort of any other views on that.
No, I think in summary, I think like a lot of investment decisions are based on intuition. You want to add more and more data to augment your decision making, and the more you do that, eventually it will add more transparency and make the more system more democratic. That's how we think about it. And I'm sure like we have the fortune of seeing how Bloomberg changed the public market, and I think a lot of what they achieved in public market will eventually, over next 30 years, will happen in private. Like Bloomberg had the luxury of building this company over last 30 to 40 years. And it fundamentally changed how people look at public markets. And I think that similar story will get built over next 2 to 3 decades in private market.
Okay, that's interesting. So talking about your future plan over, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, how do you see traction, doing? You think it'll be more extension of more products, or you think it'll be more extension of the number of clients, or different kind of clients using the data set? How do you think, will be the future looks like for you guys?
So I would say it's both. It's both evolution of the platform, evolution of the data that will continue to happen. And the second thing is that, I think right now in the market, we are still only a small percentage in, and there are many more corporates and many more investors that you can actually work with. So I think we would be probably expanding that more and more. To give you interesting example, there are large funds which we are signing up now, and they are starting to use a data platform for the first time now. Right, so there is a lot of and these includes some of your either also top tier funds. So that is one thing that you want to do more and more. You want to sort of have or more adoption of these platforms across the customer segments. I think the time has come. When probably we started selling. When I used to do my first sales, which was 6 years back, the question was, whether I should use it or not. So people were like, I'm able to get the information. I'm able to get the information through my network. Do I really need a platform to do that? I think right now that question doesn't come to us. And right now it is more around, now this is the information that is available, how valuable it is to you and your workflow, etc. So it is more around the latter. But I've also seen this industry sort of evolved, or the customer segment has evolved. And I think that is something that we want to work more and more, get more and more people sort of on board, starting to use some of these things more actively.
Yeah. Do you guys see this evolving? Because now more and more retail people are also getting into private investing, right? Especially in US. I mean, India is still a lot of money is required to invest privately. But in US, like, with all this rolling funds, people are able to invest $1,000, $2,000 checks in any of the private company. And a lot of people are syndicating on Twitter. You can see day in day out a lot of people trying to raise money. Do you see because of a lot of retail investors coming, having interest in private market, do you see that your product will also in future become or will be valuable to those retail people as well?
So currently we are mainly catered to enterprises, which would be either the institutional investors or the corporates. So we are currently not, we currently do not cater to the retail investors much. We do work with sort of family offices, and some segments like that. But I think for them, so coming to your question, whether that will be relevant to them. So I think to some extent, yes, if that segment becomes large, then maybe we will have sort of some variation of an offering to them, because they are obviously not doing this as a day job. So they are doing it more as a part-time job. So, they would probably require sort of, more summarized and more crisp information than, say, an institutional investor who wants to, look at a lot more data before making that decision. So, so I think for there you would require probably a variation of, what you have.
Okay. Do you want to spend a little bit of a time on the sales strategy? How you guys go about selling? Is that something you want to talk about?
Sure. So I think we had the fortune of a lot of these early players building out data and financial markets and somewhat of enterprise play. Playbook is also similar to our advisors, and so what we realized that was you could actually build a good content engine, and you can use inside sales to actually sell mid price point contract. So that was the playbook that was working very well to US or from global markets to the rest of the world, and hence we applied a similar playbook, and thankfully it worked out very beautifully for us. And so we produce a lot of content. So we love our reports. And everybody I meet today says that, oh, I've seen this sector report, I've seen your HR tech report or marketing tech report, or I've seen your unicorn monthly report. So there's a lot of brand recall. And then once they have some need around data, they come and sign up. So that sales is largely done over a phone call. And sales cycles are hence very small. So there's a lot of brand recall before they come to us.
Okay, that's it. I mean,
I think that.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, sorry.
I was saying that is an interesting thing that has happened in this overall in this, I think I would say SaaS industry, which will also probably benefit India a lot. That people are willing to buy online through, after a Zoom demo. So you don't have to physically meet a lot of the customers, as long as probably a price point is, in the mid range and not like super high. I think that is probably change that has happened over the last few years. And, I'm also excited about sort of India, the whole SaaS ecosystem which is developing in India, on the back of this, that if you are able to develop a product and sell, remotely, then that is obviously, really valuable and, puts sort of the whole talent ecosystem at a good advantage.
Yeah. I mean, there are downsides of that as well, that there are a lot of competition for the same talent, and a lot of us are struggling with that. But it's good. Actually, and I like your point on that on the content side, Abhishek. I mean, kind of similar thing what we are trying to do as well. But very clearly, every company is going to become a, and this is not my statement, I'm borrowed from somewhere, that you're going to become a media company, right? Because everybody needs to own their own story and the way you want to communicate with your customer. And then they say like every fintech is going to become a bank. So eventually this is all happens. Let's come to, so you guys started Traction in 2013, and, at that time, probably there were a couple of unicorns in India. And now we are seeing this number just, you pick up a paper, Economic Times or Mint, and every day there is a story of like somebody raising 200 billion, 300 billion. And probably there are like 10 unicorns which would have come in July itself. So how do you see this whole evolution of Indian startup ecosystem? It's very vibrant right now. You see this trend going up. What do you guys see?
So I think one of the things that we are seeing constantly is that companies are creating at such a wide range of industries. So it feels as if that people are taking an industry, picking all pieces of puzzle and then starting to solve it. So like just within banking space, we now see companies who are creating bank accounts for NRIs separately. There are companies who are creating bank accounts for Indians who wants to open a foreign bank account versus all kind of internet first bank. There are people who are creating credit card companies. So BNPL. So, and this is just financial industry, right? So I think we are not just creating more unicorns. I think at a fundamental level, the pipeline is very wide. We are taking problems across all industries and starting to solve it because the cost of building a company has gone down. And the time to build a company is like hardship has come down, right? So 20 years back, if you had to start a company, it was very, very hard. Like you had to hustle your way to get first 5 customers. There was no financing available. And I started a company in 2004. So it was incredibly hard. Nobody wanted to join a startup. There was no money. Our goal was to hit 2 lakh a month revenue so that we can pay everybody's salary and like company sustains, right? And that was very hard. You could dilute actually 50% of the company to raise 30 lakh. That was the market at that stage, right? So I think because there is availability of resources, people are picking up all pieces of puzzle and then starting to solve it at a wider space. And some of them, those are becoming successful and those are becoming unicorns. So what we see is really tip of the iceberg, and the activity is much, much wider than what you see as at a unicorn level. And I think it is obviously there is some liquidity in the market and hence the momentum has marginally increased in short run, but I think the fundamentals are also there. We are solving problem at an incredible pace, which didn't exist 15 years back. It's just so fascinating to see the kind of vision and the kind of ambition I see in people who are starting today as compared to what existed 15 years back. It is incredible. We have come a very, very long way in my opinion.
Of course, there are always divided opinions like many things in life, right? So some people call it a bubble. Some people think that there's too much liquidity driven by, all those QEs in the world. You think that our VC is just too bullish and there's a competitive nature coming in because they all have access to so much of money. They're also trying to go after any kind of deal. And now I've been reading the kind of markups are happening every week or a couple of weeks. Things are doubling, tripling or whatever, to a point that someone mentioned that, why you should waste your time in public markets. The private markets are so much better, where you can create so much of returns. But is it bubble, or is it just the start of the phase, or is it the phase? Is it the inflection point where things looks wild at time, but actually this is just forming the base? What do you guys think?
So I think in every 4 years, there will be 1 year where things will slightly go above the average. But I think if you look at the last 10, 15 years, like the amount of money that is coming to the ecosystem has constantly increased. And that is and this is only India specific allocated money. Like a lot of this money is allocated for global companies. Like let's say if Insight Venture Partners is investing in India, they're not looking, this is not a budget carved out for India. They are saying that we want to back growing good companies, and that company happens to be in India, and hence we got that money. If we didn't get this money, maybe another Israel company would have gotten this money, or some company in France would have gotten that money. So I think we are today getting a bulk of our money based on the competency or based on the capability that we have built in these companies and their stories, not because it's allocated for India. And I think people are not realizing that within the next 5 years, this entire wave will hit public markets. And then public markets will get to enjoy that entire upside, right? So think about Infosys. When I came out of campus in 2003-04, everybody used to talk about that Infosys is overvalued and how will it make more money? And we used to say that we should short Infosys. But like fast forward 15 years, like both TCS and Infosys crossed 100 billion in market cap. Like think about the amount of value generation or wealth creation that has happened. So all of this wealth creation is right now happening in the private market, but all of this will hit the public market in the next 10 years. And there will be enough and more to capture for every set of investors. I think it's just the pace of innovation has increased and it has a cycle. So in India specifically, we are seeing the first cycle where the first set of companies are being created, which will go public. And then there will be a constant supply of companies which will create value in private as well as eventually hit the public markets and create value there.
Okay. Now, you guys are a successful company now, and but you also track a lot of private companies. You guys invest in private companies as well. Is there a common pattern you see? What causes the success and failures in startups? Any learnings from them?
I think
Well,
I'll probably add one line. I think the main learning is that there is no fixed pattern, and your pattern that you have is broken by the next company. You think that it has to be a veteran starting. The next company will be founded by a college dropout. So any fixed thing that you have, I think the realization is that that is to be broken. So every company, the way it is created, is sort of unique.
No, absolutely. I think there's another saying which is very common, that there are no bad ideas. There are only ideas which are too early.
Yeah,
so
that's true. That's very true.
I think Byju's is a great example. I think I have personally met like 50 to 100 EdTech companies and they didn't work out. And then there was one which eventually did work out.
Yeah.
So I think timing is very important. But other than that, I think you need to really want to solve that problem. That is another thing that really matters, because it looks very rosy from the outside, but it's a lot of hard work and a lot of you need a lot of strength. There will always be non-believers around you. And I've seen this in very successful companies. Company becomes like a $10 billion company and there are people around them which feel that the company won't make it, right? So you need to really want to make it happen to survive all that cynicism around you to keep going forward.
Right.
Okay.
I think one of the things just to add is, your founder problem fit, or the founder, that fit. I think that is one thing that I've seen key thing. I've seen sort of founders who started companies in good sectors, but have given up too early. Because obviously in the initial couple of years, there's a lot of hardship which is there, right? You are building a product. You're also, you're sort of raising the funds, wherein, invariably you will hear a lot of no's and then you will hear yes. And plus you also have to do recruitment, of your senior management, wherein you have to really convince them about the idea and they are really telling you whether it's really worth it, why not this. So you have to have a lot of conviction to be able to hear a lot of no and still have a vision of how this will evolve. So I think that is probably one thing which I've seen, sort of very core, which is how convinced you are, or how do you see this pan out, and are you able to forego the intermediary lot of no's that you may hear initially, because you have the vision of the company going forward.
Okay, that's right. You guys have also interacted with a lot of VCs, right? And some VCs are clearly much better winners, or they pick up winners much better than other funds. Clearly, some of the big marquee ones. Do you think the reason behind that they have a good selection process, like an IIT, where only good students go because of their entrance exam? Only good students go to the IIT, and of course, that's why people end up doing well, or they actually have a knack of picking up great businesses. All those the most successful VCs who are.
So I would say it's a combination of both. One is obviously you need to have good sourcing, that you need to be able to see a lot of deals, that is helpful. And funds have done that differently, right? Like even in US, if you look at it, Andreessen Horowitz has done a very good job at just they have a media agency in house. They have like such a large team who are working on different things. So everyone sort of knows the name. So if you're thinking about fundraising, you'll probably go to them at some point in time, across some stages. So obviously having a good sort of deal flow, whether it's inbound or outbound, that is obviously helpful. But I would say, obviously the knack is definitely there, and you can see the successful sort of partners who've been there, or investors who've been there, have all different styles of doing that. Some people do it more through their network. Some people do it more by just, evaluating. But different people have different styles. I don't know if Abhishek has to add anything on that.
But I think the good news is that in public markets, you have to get a lot of your calls right, and there's a lot of data supporting everything exists. But in private market, every year there will be a few companies which are like dark horses, which doesn't look like successful companies to begin with. Like Paytm is a great example. I think they filed to go public in, I think, maybe 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that time frame, when they were doing a vast company. And that then they realized that there are not enough takers, and then they decided to stay private, and then they launched Paytm. And today they are filing to go public at around, like, there are rumors that they are going to be valued at like north of 20 billion. But I think, so startup world has a lot of these dark horses where there is suddenly a big breakout company which doesn't look like anything which exists before. So every investor gets an opportunity to actually back a large outsized outcome if you continue to be at it and then persist and work very hard towards it. So that is different in most, that is unlike other markets where competency is everything. Here, I think there's a little bit of luck factor, and if you are at it, there is a good chance that you'll find your winner in a few years. And the good news is that if you find one big winner, that can pay off for all the hard work. And the outsized outcome theory is so powerful. Like, Accel has been a fund in US for like 40 years now. But I think one Facebook will pay up for so much of the capital that has been deployed in past that it's incredible, right? So everybody there's a fair chance for every newcomer to actually find their Facebook or Google and then make it big.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's come to, how do you see this whole women participation in the Indian startup ecosystem? We've been, at our own entity itself, and I used to be leading the DNI Council at Bank of America when I was there. So this is something close to my heart, and I have 2 daughters as well, so it's more closer to my heart. But it's so tough to hire females in a company. They don't even, our problem is that they don't even apply. That's more from the employment point of view. But
Right.
in the whole startup ecosystem, how do you see, the whole women participation?
Yeah, so I think the numbers are pretty low right now. Like, if you look at the number of female founders or female VPs in companies, or even if you look at the other side, right, like the number of female partners in VC and PE funds are very limited. You can just count on, like one hand, fingertips. It's so less. So obviously the numbers are less. And it may also have to do with like the funnel which feeds into some of these. So for instance, if you look at engineering, colleges like in IIT Bombay, at least where I was there, the ratio was 5%. 5% female, so 30 females on a class of over 500 or so. So that was the ratio which is there. So obviously the funnel which is feeding into some of these streams are also lesser, and I would say that that's probably one of the reasons. But on a good part, I think this is improving. Now you see a lot more sort of like female founders who are there. Some of the funds are consciously hiring female in their investment team, which is good that they're doing that. The third thing which I see is board members asking companies about what is the ratio of a female that you have in your workforce. Some things that you would not expect people to have asked a few years back, but right now at least they're asking. So even if the numbers will take some time, at least people have started consciously tracking it. So I think that probably I'm hopeful that this will improve because people have started talking about it more. And I think the other thing which is also sort of helpful is there are a lot of communities which are coming in, which talks about practical hacks about how do you manage. There might be different issues that people have. So for instance, there are a few points wherein people, like at least in work, I've seen people take a break, like when for instance they them after their maternity break, that is one period that there's some fall off that you happen, or when they get married they have a change in location, that's a time wherein you have some fall off happen. So there are some phases wherein fall off happens, and as you as an organization, if you can talk about it more, about how do you handle these things and how do you manage multiple things, I think that would be helpful. And I think I see more and more sort of companies doing that, and organizations also sort of helping you do that. So I'm hopeful that this number will probably improve. But obviously there is a lot of headroom that it requires to that we need to improve in this region.
You guys think that the whole remote or hybrid itself, very clearly we are not going back to 100% in the office. That's my view. I personally don't like 100% remote as well. So, we are probably leading to a more hybrid kind of work where, a few days you're expected in the office. Do you think that will help, more and more female?
Interestingly, I would have thought that it might have helped, but the data is actually otherwise. So I was actually speaking to someone in the US And so S&P had done this, very detailed analysis also on this. And in fact, they found the other way around, that the female participation actually dropped after, a little bit of, from work from home. One of the reasons is being because now you have to manage multiple things. Like earlier, you had a daycare, for instance, wherein you can put your kids to daycare, and then, you have some support, and then you were able to, go out in the office and then, work. But if you don't have daycare, then what do you do? How do you manage that? And if you don't have sort of help, at home, how do you manage it? So, very counterintuitive to what I would have also imagined. This is actually, impacted the other way around. Because your whole support system, as long as they are stable, then you're able to sort of work. But if the support system breaks, somehow the expectation, I think, in a lot of families is that the female will firstly take care of it, and hence if someone has to take a call about we'll take a half day, then it typically ends up being the female for some reason. So I think hopefully when the support system actually improves, like you have a daycare, you have other people who can help you, I think that will probably go a long way in increasing the female participation.
Okay, that's interesting. That's something, a little bit of counterintuitive that what you would have thought, but I think the reverse is happening. Let's talk about the, some of the internet IPOs we've seen in this year, right? So a few successful ones. Zomato has been a big, huge success, even post-listing. But there are a couple more who are actually trading below the IPO prices as well. How do you see this whole, and then more and more companies going to come, right? Paytm, as you mentioned, and there are more and more companies. But how do you see this whole ecosystem, going forward in terms of how do you see companies coming out with this IPO? Is it going to probably be a big thumbs up to the whole public market, or that can cause the public market to remain sideways for some time because of the supply?
So at least what we have been hearing is that broadly public market has been waiting for tech companies to come public. And I think there's a lot of excitement among, anecdotally also, when we meet friends who are in public market, they all mention that we are waiting for this whole tech stream to start coming public. And like it could not have happened earlier, because like in 2008, if I look at it, we were investing like 500 million a year in startups. And India was witnessing like 2 deals a week. So the pipeline was very small, and it takes 10 years to become a public company broadly, right, at least. And so I think we are first seeing that when we started seeing the momentum increase, and then some of these companies are now maturing to reach a point where they can think about going public. And there was always anxiety about, at least the hearsay was that Indian market likes a lot of profitability, a lot of deep bottom lines, and a lot of startups were being built for growth initially. So people were anxious that will they get support or not. But I think Zomato listing gave some confidence that it can, like, at least they crossed the gate, or they crossed the gate and became public, and they got some good markup on the lay of listing. So at least it was a good, I think from a startup ecosystem, it was a lot of validation that their imagination of going public can actually come true. So now as more and more companies go public, I think it will become a norm. So right now, people, when you talk to founders, like maybe 5 years back, they didn't even think IPO is an option because nobody was there. There are very few tech companies that had gone public. So people were unsure, where people not going public. Is it because they are not ready, or is it because public markets are not ready, or is it like a lot of hard work to actually run a public company? So people were unsure. But as people are going public and people see their colleagues or friends running public companies, it will become a norm. So I see that if we see some of these more companies, like the next flood of tech companies that are coming, if some of them see successful IPO listings, then I think the floodgates will open, and then almost everybody will come. But I think Zomato listing was a huge validation for everybody. I think everybody has started to now think very seriously about going public, or at least is exploring that is it an option for them based on where they are. Okay. Yeah, if you like to add something.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think earlier people used to think that Indian market is not deep enough to go public. And, when you would talk to some of the investors, they would think that, you have to just think about NASDAQ listing, or that is why you would actually incorporate in Singapore or in US, so that listing, overseas is much more easier. And right now, you have like Zomato, who has raised like $1 billion, Paytm, who's going to raise like nearly $2 billion. So there's so much of depth in the market which is there. So that whole notion that there is there's no depth that is obviously been proven otherwise, and there are a lot more examples there. So I think once people see this whole cycle, I think that will just accelerate this whole motion right now. To just give you an example, when I had to just speak to some of the founders, who had gone through this journey, there were only a handful of people in the tech ecosystem that I could speak to. There were you can just count, there are only 4-5 companies across all the fund portfolios also that you can actually speak to and get some experience. And right now you have at least a dozen companies who have filed their RHP or in the process of preparing for that. So there's so much of knowledge which is getting built in this ecosystem that will probably just accelerate this whole thing.
Okay. Yeah. Let's hope this. It looks like the trend is going to continue, and hopefully we have a long way where we're going to create a lot more valuable companies here. Now, many youngsters are also, especially more in US, and we are seeing a trend in India as well, thanks to this whole, type 3 IF, and, where people can invest as small as 3 lakhs in a startup. What are the various, avenues people can look at while looking to invest privately? What are some of the factors some individuals should look at while deciding on that? Probably more, because you guys also invest, on a personal level as well. So just want to pick your brain on that.
So I think, thankfully, India has some platforms where one can go and invest in startups. I think Let's Venture has done a reasonable job. AngelList has done a good job in India, and I think people who are starting to invest in private market, I would typically tell them to be very cautious, and it's the most risky asset class. So I think always wear your fear hat more than greed hat when you're investing. That is very critical. Even after seeing this market for 14 years now, we always wear our greed hat as much as and whenever we look at a company and when we are investing, we never think that, oh, this is a great opportunity, let's put a lot of money into it. We would never do that. We will always be cautious and put little capital and then let it build out, because it's a very, very unpredictable market with respect to investing.
Okay.
And I would probably also just say to people that, whatever money that you're investing, typically this is the money which you have written off or given to charity, or you're not going to see it for at least, next 5-6 years, and you should be fine with it. So don't invest with the expectation of a return and a particular IRR. It might happen, obviously, because this ecosystem is but if you invest with that, then you end up getting probably investing for the wrong reason. So one is that, and the other thing I would say is probably instead of have a little bit of diversification, across companies, because obviously you like a particular opportunity, but there are a lot of other things that happens in the private market which is beyond the control of the company. So even if the company is really good, the team is really good, there are a lot of external things that happens in the market typically that may decide, because given the stage of the companies. So I think just looking at sort of more companies, that might be a good way, for you to start investing.
Okay, that's interesting. Now let's do some rapid fire. So Neha will go first, and then Abhishek. Now, first one, total number of unicorns in India in next 5 years.
Okay, so I would say that currently I think India is close to 50, and US is probably close to 400 unicorns. So India should probably reach.
But in emerging market, I always worry about such thing. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that.
No, so I think even if there are country-specific bans, I think it's global EdTech. I'm not. I'm not as excited about India, teaching Indian kids alone. But I think there will be a company which will do a great job at math and will teach a lot of students on math across the globe. So that is what I'm very, very excited about. And I think I feel India has really good empathetic teachers, and over time we will see a lot of companies getting created out of that. There are hundreds of subjects, a lot of non-courses also. All of that will start happening.
Okay. Now let's come to top 3. We're not yet unicorn. The startup to watch out for.
I think I will skip this. I think it's pretty difficult to figure out 3. There are so many interesting companies. In fact, we have coverage on Soonicorns, which is soon to be unicorns. Company. So I think it's just there are so many good companies in that bucket.
Okay. Abhishek, you want to dare to call out? Yeah.
Now I'm most excited about fitness startups that are coming. I think there are a bunch of them, I think, which are sort of helping fitness/healthcare companies, which are actually solving. Either there are companies like Ultrahuman, which are just tracking. They're basically tracking just glucose meter, but making
Yeah,
people
that's
more
interesting one actually. I've been tracking levels in US, which is very fairly, I guess, the similar field and all. Yeah.
So, like every startup is solving a good problem, but I think this is a problem which will sort of really make a big difference. And I personally look forward to a world where everything in my health and fitness is measured and people guide me along. I think there are a lot of apps which we have started to use in last 2-3 years where they tell you like what to expect, what not to expect, what does it mean. There are a lot of content around health, fitness. So all of that is something which I'm most excited about, and I really wish they grow faster than everything else, or they become mature and solve this problem in next 5 to 10 years. That would be the most exciting thing to see.
Yeah, I'll be with you on that. So I think that definitely is looked very. I've been on the wait list for levels for long, and they've not yet given me the access. Yeah. Since both of you have been VC and founders, you've done VC earlier. You've been founders now. You also invest personally as well. What do you think one can learn from each other, and which one of that you personally enjoy more?
So for me, VC is very intellectually satisfying. You get to see a lot more action. You get to see a lot of activity across the whole ecosystem. But I would say that your leverage is very limited. So the amount of work that you're doing is just you and probably just 2 or 3 people in the team. That's about it. So that is more intellectually satisfying, I would say. VC founder is more operationally satisfying. So you have like a whole team who is running so many things, and there are so many things which get done on a daily basis. And there are so many things implemented that on a daily basis, things which are launched on a daily basis. So in terms of action, it is more satisfying to see things, see the operational part of things and things becoming, live and active, what you would have imagined earlier. So I would say both of them are fairly different in that sense, and I think for me, probably the latter appeals, more. I would have been very unsatisfied if I had not, been a founder.
Right. No, so I think most people a lot of people I know, they always struggle with saying that what is a great career and they are doing things, but they may not necessarily enjoying it. I think we had the fortune of 2 careers, which at least I thought was very satisfying in some ways or the other. Like you mentioned, one is intellectually satisfying and one is operational, but you could do any of those and stay very, if you look back at the end of your professional life, you will say that it was worth the journey and it was worth all the hardship. And for me, I think the big reason of transition was that I felt I was at the age where if I didn't, like Jeff Bezos has the regret minimization framework. So I thought I would have regretted not trying this out. I could always come back. So when I was leaving, I had already done the Flipkart deal. So I knew that if I ever want to come back, it may not be very hard because there is at least one success story. And when I was leaving, it was obvious that it will become a big one. And but I think I was seeing that there is a great wave of innovation coming in India, and I wanted to make sure that I wanted to try my hands at it. I think there's a lot to learn from VC journey. I think for me, the big one was my expectation from a business in terms of size, became 100x. When I started first time in 2004, the only goal was to earn 2 to 3 lakh a month in revenue so that everybody get paid, and then you want to think after that. And that could take multiple years, right? Because there is very little money to hire and do sales. Everything was to be done. I would go in the morning for 8-9 hours, I would do the sales, then come back home. There were 2 other people, 3 of us would code till 2 a.m. and then start the next day. So it was a very tiring journey. It used to be a lot of burnout. In VC, I realized that this is how business should be built. So your expectation of what a successful business changes. And then I think secondly, other thing that I learned was that how much pessimism stays around successes also. So I always used to think that, Amazon is such a great company, and everybody around Amazon would be thinking the same. But when I saw some of the larger companies getting created, I realized that from inside that there is a lot of skepticism at every stage. And it always felt that maybe the next step may not happen, right? Things looked very hard. But then over time, things worked out. So you become a believer. You realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and you should just keep going and things will happen. right? And it didn't happen just once. It happened again and again and again and again. And I realized that all successes look like that. So you just have to keep at it and keep going. And that made all the difference, I think, when we did what we did now.
That's very interesting. We're coming towards the end of our conversation. I actually have two questions. One is, and which I will ask later, but I'm just telling you now that how does it feel like working together as husband and wife? But before that, I want to ask the question, what advice you will give? And this is a question we ask everyone on our show. What is one advice you will give to your own 20-year-old self?
Yeah. So for me, I think one of the things that I have seen a lot is, at different stages of time, you are a little bit confused about, what career or what is the long-term thing that you want to pursue. For instance, it is always about, should I do in banking, this, or, what career? So I think the advice that I would probably give to my younger self is whatever you choose, just do it well and don't do it half-heartedly. Because, however cliched it might sound, but, you can actually connect the dots actually looking backward. So whatever you would have learned in a stint that, may not be a top priority at that time, but, later on it actually became very valuable for you. So consulting, for instance, like at that time it would seem that I'm making a lot of slides, but that's actually in addition to obviously also a lot of industry experience that the exposure that you get, that's like a valuable skill to be able to communicate your story very well, very crisply, right? So I think whatever you're doing, just do it wholeheartedly, though you might be having sort of confusion around what is the bigger vision of how this will fit into the larger scheme of things. I think that is one thing that I see a lot of people going wrong in. People, thinking that I'm not sure and then not doing a good job. But I think that is one thing that I would probably urge people to rethink and just give your 100% to whatever you're doing.
No, absolutely. Actually, incidentally, I had a similar thought in mind. I tell people, do more, judge less. Like, so whatever is in your hand, do a great job at it. And whenever you decide for your next step, go ahead and do that. But while you are at it, don't get confused, just do a great job. And eventually, whatever you're learning now will eventually come handy later. And you will not know today. But I think do more, judge less, and then just let it unfold. It may eventually just work out for you. But if you are doing a bad job, then wherever you are, it will still, your peers might succeed, but you may not. Right? So it's not just about the stream you are in, it's also about doing a great job at whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I've seen, I worked in one company for 24 years. It's all about just keep going, man. Just keep doing, because it may sound boring, non-exciting. Somebody else must be doing very exciting work. अच्छा लग रहा है, बाहर कोई दूसरा अच्छा कर रहा है, लेकिन, सबका time आता है. So, yeah. Last question, which I just mentioned. How does it feel like working together as husband and wife?
So I think, as I was saying, financially, it's a really bad decision because, I think I felt the pain of it when in the initial 3 years when I was staying in the Bay Area and I was not getting salary because obviously the company was very small. And then, you had to pay Bay Area rent with your savings. So I thought I had a good career in consulting and VC. So, I had some saving, thankfully. So, but still, when you see your bank balance going down, you feel like, oh my God. So I would say, and when your spouse is probably in the same bucket as you and not getting salary, I think that can be a little disconcerting. So I would say, apart from that, financially, obviously, you have to be really strong, as that's, strong at heart to be able to see that journey. I would say the otherwise, it's just normal because we have our different departments. We typically have only a couple of meetings, which would be common, and there are different things. Anyways, in a startup, there are so many things which are going on, so you have to divide and conquer. And I think we have our different sort of strengths, I would say. So you typically end up dividing things like that, and you just run with it.
I think one of my things was that you, as an individual, you have to be very good at separating your lives. So whatever you will obviously have difference of opinion at work, you will have difference of opinion at home. You need to learn to just keep them in silos. When you're on office, you are co-founders. When you're at home, you're not. And then if you carry the weight of each other at different places, you will obviously struggle, even if you are not working together, right? If you have tough time at home and if you show that in work to your colleagues, that will not be a good idea. So I think you learn to compartmentalize that so that you don't carry that weakness. And I think the big advantage was that we get a lot of time where we can discuss vision of the company, and which is what keeps you insulated from day-to-day operational ups and downs. And that really helped because we had a lot of time where we could talk about it. And this is a problem, thankfully. So since this was a problem which was very close to our heart, it actually became a benefit. And I typically tell people that don't do it together because you are spouses, do it together if you really want to solve that problem, because this journey is going to be very hard. And just the factor that you know each other and you are married won't be able to carry the interest forward. You will not be able to make it for another 10, 20, 30 years, right? Eventually it will catch up. So do it together if you're both very, very excited about it, and learn to give each other space and may use it to your advantage rather than disadvantage. But I think in our case, we independently thought of this idea in different forms and we really wanted to do it. I think we literally spent 6 months convincing each other that I have sent a mail to Neha that I really want to do it. Why don't you just graduated from Stanford? Why don't you take up a high-paying job and I will figure out my way and do it? And Neha was thinking likewise, and eventually we did it together because I think you should do it if you really like the idea. Nothing else should be a variable, I think.
And just to add to one point of even otherwise, the fact that we have been, or probably we are so much glued up into this industry, and however boring it may sound, but even if you look at it otherwise, like outside office hours, if you think who are we hanging out with, these are typically either VCs or founders because all our network in the last decade has been in that thing. So it's either the customer segment or something related to that what we do. So in that sense, it may sound very boring that you are still in the same ecosystem that you're evolving, but I think that is how at least my life has sort of evolved, and that's how that's how I probably enjoy most.
That's awesome. So we thanks a lot, Neha. Thanks a lot, Abhishek, for doing this. Really appreciate your time. All the best to you guys, and good luck to you.
Thanks a lot, Raj, for having us. Was awesome to be speaking to you.
Thanks, Raj. It was great to be here today.
Yeah, great to be back. Thanks. Yeah.
Best wishes for Multiply. We really hope for a bright future in every step that you take in this company.
Yeah. Thank you so much.